Well, hello, everybody. What's going on? It is Wednesday. My name is Garrett Wilhelm, and welcome to At the Gardens. As always, we bring you amazing people on the show to talk about kids, to talk about education, and to talk about any subjects in between that. It's been a fantastic week here at Creative Gardens in Ashburn. We've been serving our kids, personalizing their learning, and making sure that they are engaged in their work. I mean, oh my gosh, to ask kids to sit for 8 hours a day in front of a computer, if you can imagine, we have to get super creative. One of the things that we have here is a ton of first and second graders and kindergartners as well, too. And there's a big subject in that early education space around early literacy. And so today, I would love to bring on somebody that is fantastic, that was recommended to me from our regional director, Krista Luna. She's someone that has worked with Krista in that facet in schools in Oklahoma, I believe, and we're going to learn much more about that as we move forward. But without further ado, I want to introduce our guest today. Her name is Brynn Decker, and she is the founder of Inspiring Literacy. So let's bring her on in 3, 2, 1. Hello, Brynn.
Hello, Garrett.
Okay, excellent. The sound works again. So things are going great here. Thank you so much for doing the show today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so as we always start the show, I always want to learn a little bit more about who you are. So there's a kind of lens to our show, that lens being education and children. And so if you could explain to our viewers who you are, what you do, and how you got to that career path.
Okay. Well, currently I am the founder of Inspiring Literacy, and I've been in education since I graduated from Miami University in 2003. So I started out as a second and third grade teacher and just loved the classroom. Loved every minute of just creating that community of learners, coming alongside kids, helping them feel successful, and to just have a love for learning. And the one thing that I noticed, though, with my second and third graders, first I taught second grade, then I taught third grade. It wasn't a blended, but my 2 grades that I bopped between. I noticed that kids that struggled to read, struggled to spell, struggled to read, could read perfectly but couldn't comprehend. I noticed that reading is hard, and I felt underprepared in college to meet that challenge. I was following the curriculum. I was doing everything I knew. I was having them go early or stay late and try to do extra touches of, repetition, remediation, whatever the curriculum would give me to do. But I noticed that there was like something I didn't know, something that wasn't working as well as I wanted it to work. And so I decided to go back to get my master's in reading, language, and literacy at Georgia State. From there, I, got a whole bunch of knowledge, and I was so excited. And I tried it out in the classroom, and I still had questions.
Yeah.
It still wasn't easy.
I can't imagine that. Trust me.
I know. It's just the whole teaching kids in the brain is not as easy as we think, right?
No, not at all.
Right. So I just continued my journey. I got trained to teach with the brain in mind, and had a whole bunch of other literacy things under my belt, like Orton Gillingham and reading recovery, and just all kinds of things, trying to again make reading more simple for kids. And I was becoming successful at that through practice. And then I became a learning specialist for kindergarten and first graders at the Levitt School, a private school in Atlanta, where I fell in love with helping kids in K-1 overcome learning challenges and basically learn to read. Because if you have any learning challenges, reading is just really hard. And so I did a whole lot of work with ADD and anxiety and different things that also influence reading. And then I met Krista in Oklahoma City, where I was a instructional coach, which was super fun. And that's when I gained this passion for being a bridge. I've always been a big brain nerd and loving all the out there, because there's so much great stuff about how to teach kids to read, how to teach with the brain in mind, how to utilize all these great research studies to make education more effective. But what I learned is that it's not getting to the classroom. And professional development happens, but teachers generally go and they learn a bunch of stuff and they take it back to the classroom and they feel overwhelmed and they try some stuff, sometimes works, some stuff doesn't work. And so my work in Oklahoma City, where I got to be an instructional coach and come alongside teachers and really help them problem solve in real time and meet the needs of their kids, was just a huge aha for me of just a great passion that I had of being that bridge and that coach, that guide on the side problem solver with teachers right there in the trenches. And so now that I have my own company, Inspiring Literacy, I basically do all that I mentioned. I work with kids one-on-one because I love it, and I just alongside kids and parents and helping them with their kids who are finding it difficult to learn to read, write, and spell. And then I also am an instructional coach for schools, where I work with teachers in coaching cycles to help them meet the needs of the kids in their classroom. And I work with schools to solve, curriculum issues where they're noticing excellence with their kids with literacy. So they're wondering where the vertical alignment issue is. And then I also now, because of COVID, am doing a lot with parents, trying to be that bridge, because parents are now having to take this unique role where they're having to kind of maybe fill in some gaps that their kids are experiencing from being out of school for so long. And so I've now built something online where I'm trying to be a resource to parents and come alongside them to help kids learn and grow.
That is, yeah. And first of all, amazing introduction. If anybody didn't know what you were doing now, they definitely do. And it's a lot of things that we can align on. Early in my career, I was a Montessori teacher for a 3 to 6 year old classroom where you had that kind of, as an educator, I feel like those that teach the young age have such a wealth of warmth from that moment, that strike of a child finally getting it, right? And how powerful that moment can be. I mean, honestly, it's brought me to tears at some moments when you see a kid kind of, and the world opens up to them in a different sense, and for good and bad these days, you being able to read the scrolling on CNN and things like that. So there's a lot to say for this moment in a child's life where they learn to read. And I believe that every child, as I'm sure you do, should have that moment. Yeah. And that moment should be assisted. And I think what you're doing, and for those that are listening, what Brynn is doing is very vast and diverse in the approach, because children, as we know, and as we thought before, and now we know, all learn differently and all have different, not only environmental, but social, emotional, and character trait strengths and weaknesses that then affect ultimately their reading. Yep. And so what I love to hear is that, you spent a good amount of time developing your skill set, your tool set. We talk about that a lot here at our schools, having that toolkit to meet every learner, because right. I think the approach of coming, to a child in assisting them to read can't be one where it's like this. You know what I mean? Where I think ego gets involved. Maybe the parent at home, and this is where I think a lot of people will get value out of today. Maybe the parent at home is getting angry at their kid because they're not able to read. And I talk a lot about us parents attaching our own school experiences to our children's school experiences, and kind of setting an expectation that isn't reasonable to them. So you have parents at home that are really kind of struggling with this. Given your skill set, given your tool set, how should parents, and I don't want you to give too much of the secret sauce away, right? Because I definitely want people to go to you and check you out and what you're doing, especially on the at-home stuff. What would you suggest to parents initially if you have a kiddo that's, K through 2, that's emergent reading, that potentially is struggling at home? What advice would you give those parents?
First of all, I'd say that reading is hard. And so if your child thinks it's hard, that's because it is hard. Yeah. But oftentimes we don't recognize that in order to read, in order to write, in order to spell, we're using so many processes in the brain that are coming together. And so with those thought processes in mind, sometimes kids have knowledge, but they're not integrating it. That's why they're not utilizing it. So they know they know all the stuff, but they've got some strategies to utilize that. Other kids have gaps in their learning, which might be happening with COVID, where they just either learned it, but it was piecey, and so they're not understanding how it connects together, or they didn't learn all the pieces. And so really it's about, first of all, just identifying, is this just hard for my child because reading's hard and we just need to practice more? And so do we just need to build this into our life? You know, like have I, as a parent, been the leader of making literacy a priority in my home, reading aloud to my kid every night, making sure that we're reading 20 minutes every day, supporting them wherever they are, whether that's you read a page, I read a page, whether that's them reading everything, practicing sight words, practicing different phonics strategies, just trying to figure out what do they need. So that just where a parent can kind of be the leader to make it a priority and set some realistic goals. Or is it, and that'll work, or is it that you've been doing that and child still isn't progressing? Because to me, it's about growth.
Yep.
That if we've identified why a child's not growing and we've put in a plan that's working, a child's going to grow. And so you've figured it out, you stick to it. But if you're working really hard and you're not seeing the results, you might need to call on someone who does know, like a specialist, whether that's a teacher or a reading specialist or a tutor or whatnot, because parents aren't supposed to we shouldn't expect parents to teach their kids how to read or know just because they know how to read, they can teach their kid how to read. It's not that simple, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think overall that COVID in general, and we'll get more into that in a second, but COVID in general shined a light on the importance of educators, not only the importance of educators, but the importance of being in an environment with educators, feeling that space, having that those emotional cues that happen not only as an educator, but as a student that are kind of unspoken, like those underlying, you're educating, maybe you're in an instructional, coach session and you're in line with teachers that are actually educating. There are certain things that you can feel out within those environments to know that are not there, that are not existing currently. And I think you talk about those gaps, right? Like that's one of those big ones is, humans are made to be around other humans. That's why that's, not only, suggested culturally, but like scientifically, biologically, like we're supposed to be around other humans. And I think, I've seen parents in the moment. I have, county public school kids in our building here every single day. And one of the things that parents are really struggling with their kiddos at home is, one, assuming that, like we're saying, like you're saying specifically, that reading is easy, because it's not, right? That there's such a broad and vast approach to each child and how we teach them to read, and ultimately how they teach themselves to read, right? And you see such a struggle with parents because they're meeting fire with fire. And I think that's a huge thing, is to understand, like, one is to set some strategy in place, some goals, get educated on the subject, maybe, and I look at reading in a couple of different ways. And this is a question that I have for you is, talking about phonetic awareness and talking about early literacy, in Montessori, we start tuning that in very early. At around 3 years old, you're starting to do those early phonetics. Do you find in your field that the earlier a child is introduced to phonetic awareness, phonetic sounds, maybe left to right progression in their work, things like that, that you see an easier time, even with some kind of learning difference or neurodiversity? Do you see that has an effect on a child's reading ability?
Yes, with a big exclamation mark.
Yeah. So what, that being said, with a huge exclamation point, like what are some things, what's the number one, let's do this. What's the number one thing a parent of a 2, 3, 4-year-old kiddo at home can do for their kiddo when it comes to early literacy?
Great question. Well, let me just give you the facts real quick of the two hugest determiners of child success, like with kindergarten readiness and beyond in the K2 zone, is their vocabulary. So the words that they have floating around in their head, in essence, the words that are found in their life, because they're not reading, just the vocabulary in their brain coming in through their ears, and their phonemic awareness, which is what you mentioned, of the knowledge of sounds and being able to isolate sounds and play with sounds, rhyming, Dr. Seuss. Think about just all the sounds we can have fun with. Those are the two biggest things that kids need to have in place to be successful when they hit kindergarten.
And I think, go ahead. Sorry.
No, yeah. So your question is great of, well, what can we do? And, 2 to 4, what does that really look like? Because they're not reading. So how do you play with sounds in a meaningful way and fill their brain with the good stuff? I call it the fertile soil, that it's like, cultivate the soil And then when you plant the seed grows quick. But if the soil's not fertile, the seed's going to struggle. And so your question points right to my little talk on fertile soil of the 2 to 4 zone.
I love that. So considering building that vocabulary, building that having conversations, right? Like I think those things are, and getting, and you said it earlier in our conversation, which is, kids struggle to learn when there's no contextual application of the concepts in which they're learning. And so you have to have a child that's not only hearing vocabulary, but putting vocabulary into context in the environment. I think those things are hugely important. And in a Montessori environment, which was kind of my box that I lived in for a long time, that was introduced at a young age. So I just thought that was relatively normal. And then you kind of go into public school environments, Common Core environments, things like that, and you kind of shift that focus a little bit forward. Because let's be real, and this is part of the reason why I'm not in Montessori. Like, not everybody can afford Montessori, so which I think is a struggle. That being said, when you're talking about the best way in which to kind of, I guess my question is the best way. So parents want real stuff that they can do at home. I've always tried to read as many books to my kiddos as possible, right? And then ask some questions about, even at a young age, right? Because it's still important, even though your kiddo might kind of, blame over it. Do you find that you suggest things like designating a time per day? What are the best strategies to actually implement what we're talking about? Actually get that soil fertile.
Right. So if we're going to talk about reading books, I always think just building it into your daily routine is important, and also allowing for organic moments to happen. So for my kids, we always read every night before we go to bed. That's just our thing. And for nap time. And it's just a great little special connection time that we build in twice a day. And it takes about 20 minutes, and it looks a lot different depending on the age. But then we also have books, baskets of books all over the house. And so when my kids just want to read, they can read. And sometimes reading isn't always reading the words on the page. It's them looking at the pictures and making up their own story to go along with the books. It's just flipping the pages. It's just holding the book correctly in your hands, right side up, So there's lots of great book work with just picking books and manipulating books and discovering books.
Again, I think beyond kind of that pointed, direct reading practice, what I love about, I'm kind of a study of early childhood pedagogy and approach. And what I love about the Reggio Emilia approach is that, reading kind of goes beyond just books, right? Is you would leave a little provocation, a little challenge for a child out. Like maybe there's a material there with a little card that has that. And even for a child that potentially can't read that, they know that something's up here. Yeah. There's a little bowl. There's maybe, some manipulatives and a little card with some symbols on it that gets them inquisitive to understand that maybe that's a direction to that, and then go seek that out. Right. So many kids will actually have that happen just naturally and innately, like you said, because one of the key pieces that you touched on that I think it's really important is allow for organic experiences, self-discovered experiences with kiddos and in early literacy. And so, a lot of parents tend to do this, which is, they think the more the books, like, right, the kids need books, so I'm going to put 500,000 books into their room. And you overwhelm a child when you do that. So what I've seen a lot of success too with kind of what you're saying, which is small baskets, small collections, maybe 2 or 3 themed books for the season, something like that are just placed in very noticeable places without in your home environment. Yep. That alone can inspire an authentic reading moment, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, because kids need to watch you read and hear you read to them. And they also love their pretend life is based off of what people are doing around them. And so they'll integrate those books into their pretend teaching, their pretend mothering with their own babies, their pretend, I'm talking more girls because I have girls. I'm trying to think. Totally. Integrate that into.
No, I have girls too. Trust me, I have 2 stepsons, but the rest are girls.
Yeah. So, but in terms of picking good books, because I have a lot of parents ask me like, well, what is a good book? How do I know I'm doing this thing right? And there are really way to do it. But to integrate the whole phonemic awareness piece into it too, all of the books with rhyming, it doesn't have to be Dr. Seuss. There are so many great just play on words books out there, like the whole Little Blue Truck series. Those are great. Silly Sally. There's if you just pick up books and think, let me read this language and see if it's fun to read. And if it sounds fun and engaging. And there's two reasons why that's important. First of all, kids will tune into that because we have a rhythmic, our brains are rhythmically inclined because that's how we learn language. And so any book that has a rhythm to it, kids are going to tune into it. They might not know every word, but they're going to tune into it. Books with lots of words, kids get lost because it's too many words. So there needs to be short text on each page with lots of pictures that we can talk about, or a rhythm that they can be drawn to. And then what's awesome is that the phonological loop in their brain will memorize those books, and they'll know the next word that you're going to say. And so you can kind of pause and have them fill in the next word as they're used to you reading that same book a million times. And then all of a sudden they're reading with you, not because they can read the word on the page, but because they're hearing the rhyme and what comes next. And they're building that phonemic awareness in their brain in terms of sounds and similar sounds, different sounds, all of that component.
Yeah, and I think too, teachers, I've heard teachers in the classroom say this. I think, first of all, let me make it very clear that the moment in which a child begins to read is a very, very important moment, because you have to balance, in my mind, keeping that kind of intrinsic motivation to read moving and flowing and going by feeding that soil, that fertile soil. But you also don't want to put War and Peace in front of them and be like, read it. And then they're like, oh, I can't. And then their motivation to do that kind of dwindles. So it's a key moment in reading to make sure that you're, appropriately challenging a child. But to go back to what you were saying before, when a child memorizes a book, right, and the parents are reading the book to them every night, and they go and start reading it with them, I've heard so many parents, and I'm sure you've done this, is like, oh, they're not really reading, they just memorize the book. I'm like, well, that's part of it. Yep. So it's a good thing to point out, like, that is definitely a step in the right direction. That's not a negative thing. Do you find parents saying that a lot?
I do. And I validate that like, you're right, they're not really reading, so don't think your child's learned letters and sounds and decoding yet.
That's right.
What that does tell you is that they have a really strong auditory processing zone in their brain that they can hear and repeat back stuff. So that's good to know about your child. And also, I tell them, bring their attention to the pictures, so that if they're telling you the story back, make sure that they're identifying what's happening on each page with the characters and the setting, and they're using the language, the vocabulary that's on within the picture to tell the story correctly. There's some kids that just flip the pages and tell their own story, and that's fine because that's using your own language in your own world to tell a story. But if they're doing that naturally, then give them that next step of saying, well, let's take a look at the characters on this page. Do you remember what was happening in the story here? And just have them use their own words around that moment in the story. Because you're teaching them story structure, characters, noticing details, putting words to that, complete sentences. Like you're integrating language development around books, which will all be built upon a fertile soil, so that when they're in kindergarten and they're pointing to the words and they're looking at the pictures and they're building on comprehension, it's all there. It's not new to them. It's something they've been doing since they were 3.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. And, what I was thinking kind of, and going back to phonetic awareness, with kiddos, you see a lot of teachers in the environment. I see a lot of preschool teachers even doing this, which is, and again, this is up to discussion. This is why I have you on, which is great, is, in my field of Montessori and kind of alternative approaches, we focus initially, we don't even mention the letter name, right? So it's not A, B, C, D, E, it's I mean, I could do that like the back of my hand without the sound, without adding the vowel on, just getting it right in there. We learn the alphabet that way. That way, it's like we're saying, it's contextual. It's applied immediately. As soon as a child sees act together, they can start putting those things together. Do you find that there's a right or wrong there when you're teaching, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then actually the phonetic name? There is a little bit of a gap of confusion. What do you think?
That's great. So I personally believe that there are many right paths in literacy. There's not one. And so the way that you just taught with the sounds, I think is a great path. And I also think that teaching the letters and sounds is a great path. But what I do think both fields do, which is a absolute non-negotiable thing, is that you need to connect the letter and the sound. You can't just teach the ABC song because we don't name the words when we read. We use the sounds. And
That's right.
You're naming the letter and saying the sound when they're learning them. I think that that's just the thing that parents need to be aware of. Is just letter and sound. And then also when they're starting to show interest in writing their name and in writing formation, that we're doing letter formation correctly, first of all, which I think there needs to be education to parents around that, because kids have terrible, habits when they hit kindergarten and first grade that are hard to reverse at that point. So if we give parents the little poster showing them how kids should efficiently write letters, that would be helpful. But anyway, what's more important is that letter and sound is connected, and that the child is making their own personal connection to that letter is how you're going to teach young readers to learn their sounds probably best, because they might not have ever seen an alligator. So, or they probably seen an alligator.
That's so...
Like, I don't know what an igloo is. I'm not going to remember that. I've only heard you say igloo in the alphabet song.
Well, it's yeah, and it's funny even with that. Like I was doing, there's a Montessori material that I'm sure you're familiar with called the sandpaper letters, right? So when you're learning letters and children are in what Montessori called a sensitive period, where their senses are heightened and they're apt to learn more through all of their senses, not just taking in things visually or auditorily. Yes. I was doing the 3-period lesson, which is kind of the way in which you introduce new concepts in Montessori, especially around language. And I hold up and I just simply, no words, just kind of show it around. And all the kids could say was apple, apple, apple. And I'm like, well, yeah, but it's apple. I would take this around and it was snake. And I'm like, well, yes, like you're coinciding the initial letter sound with, words that start with that. And that's great. I think that's fantastic. That's where, and I love your approach to it, is even for me, it gets confusing because I'm like, well, I want this first introduction to be so, awesome and that they get it. But I guess, there's that ego in me that wants the lesson to go well. I like your approach a little bit better, which is like, that's a really great approach, but there are also 500 million other ones that work. So, it's interesting because, even in my position now where I kind of sit at the top of a company, my favorite thing to do is to get into the classroom for those check moments, right? Is to remind myself, you don't have it all figured out, Garrett. Like that's why you hire great people around you.
Well, we never will. The person that thinks they've got it all figured out is lying to themselves, because
has those 3 fingers pointed back at them when they're pointing. You know what I mean? So,
I will say one more thing with just what we were talking about with letter and sound, phonemic awareness. We kind of talked about the element to it, but the other really important piece with phonemic awareness and that fertile soil is, if we say b, and then ball, we're planting that seed of initial sound, which is how kids will begin to read. They won't necessarily see the whole word, all the letters. They usually hear the beginning and hear the end and the middle.
That's right.
And so by giving kids, like doing a little, B says b, like ball and bull around the room, can we see that starts with a b? Like getting them to recognize that words start with sounds. That's what's really important. It's not important that we immediately think b, ball, unless you need that because you have a weakness there and you need to be triggered by just one thing.
That's right.
But most kids, if you just flood them with lots of words that start with the b sound, that's going to be better for them because they're going to recognize it and make connections on their own all the time. And that's going to help them learn it quicker. Also coming up with, if you do want to pick that one thing, like for kids that are having trouble remembering the sounds of the alphabet, I tell parents, use names, use whatever the kids love. Don't use what's necessarily on that picture card and that alphabet deck that you bought at the dollar store.
Yep.
That's a great starting point. But if you've got a friend, if their brother's name is Seth, then that's a clear, have them remember that the S is Seth's letter, because they're going to say the names of the people in their family, even like grandparents' names like Pop, and Nona or whatever it is. those letters that they hear really clearly all the time, those sound letters. And so connect that visual of that letter to that sound they're hearing all the time, and it's more likely going to stick.
Very, very cool. And I hope everybody that's watching, we're actually getting a great audience flowing through here. It remembers these tips and tricks. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, right, is we're in a pandemic. I don't know if you knew that. And we're in this crazy kind of day and age where there's no end in sight. The information in which we're given is so polarized that it's hard to find the truth. And, in the middle of all of that are kids that are not in school that are really struggling. And I see it every day. I see some kids thriving, right? Like this can be decent for some children. But when we're talking about, and the reason I mention this is you're seeing a lot of school systems, including ours, sending back that K through 2 age first. Yeah. Let's unpack that a little bit. So when you're talking about like literacy in general, have you found that one, you're probably getting more business, like because parents are calling you and stressed out and freaked out, but how important do you think the in-person approach is to early literacy?
Huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I'm one that believes that there are fantastic literacy technologies out there that, that I think schools have been utilizing to try to reach kids because the in-person is so hard that, well, let's try to teach them somehow. Let's use all these different platforms, technology platforms to teach kids how to read.
Yeah.
And I think they're effective in their own right. I'm not saying any of them are bad or wrong or whatever, but I just 100% don't think that kids can learn to read without a human being. Because I believe that reading is one size fits one. And reading happens in one-on-one conferencing and around a small group table is what I believe. So when I'm working with teachers and they're teaching reading whole group, there's a more effective way that we can do this. How can we take this lesson and bring it into a group of kids that have similar needs? And so I think that's the real piece that's been missing and why kids have been having trouble is because the teacher isn't able to use small groups to really tailor reading instruction and come alongside kids and notice their reading behaviors and tell them, here's what you're doing and it's working. And here's the problems I'm seeing you're having. And so I've got a tool for you to overcome that struggle because reading is about problem solving. So you might have all this knowledge, but you're not using it here. So here's a tool so you can use your knowledge. So I think kids, are going to have that teacher influence just for that one purpose of having someone come alongside and validate what they're doing right and giving them new strategies to move forward with what they need.
God, that's, yeah. And I think, I totally concur with you. I totally agree just in the sense of, and there's so many little things that you just said that, see, the way my brain thinks is I cut these videos up into little tidbits that are useful for parents. And I'm like in my head, as you're talking, I'm like, chop, that's one. Chop, that's two. No, I think it's super important that parents understand that even, mind you, we can't have this type of environment right now in our schooling, but that it's so important that these things are guided, that they're assisted, that there is time to kind of go through a child's reading work, that maybe there's some follow-up work with and such, because they need feedback. They need to understand that they're on the right path. They need some motivation beyond their own motivation. The thing that I was really thinking about is, and we talk a lot about here at Creative Gardens, is, kids had to kind of be faced with this completely virtual learning scenario. And like you said, they're using these apps and tools almost like, it seems like every once in a while that they're just like, well, let's try that one and let's see what happens. And let's try this one. And oh my goodness, we're going to throw that one in there. If you could, exactly. If you could see the screen, the portal screen for a kindergartner here in Loudoun County, you would have a panic attack. There are like 19, it's like looking at my iPad screen. There's 19 different apps, and kids have to navigate different login passwords. My point being is, we're putting all these tools in front of kids. We're just throwing things out there. Do you feel like there's potentially some damage being done there? Would you suggest, and I'll suggest this potentially is, people being okay with a loss of 6 months of instruction or a year of instruction and learning, and just saying, you know what, we'll pick it up when this pandemic's over, and we'll kind of cover the gaps there. Do you feel like there's any damage being done when it comes to this virtual learning scenario?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of damage being done everywhere because of, and there's also a lot of great being done because of where we are. But I think the kind of what I spoke to, that literacy is really like a journey, and kids need a coach. And so they need to understand where they are and what's next. And so teachers are the ones that are equipped to do that with the curriculum they're on. And technology has tried to take the place of teachers, but really, I think that what's going to happen is when kids come back to the classroom at some point, whatever this looks like, there's going to need to be a serious evaluation of where kids are and where the gaps are. And then schools are going to have to be okay with thinking outside of the box, that no longer are all second graders reading like second graders. Not all first graders reading like first graders. And so instead of making kids feel like they are behind or whatever, we're going to need to do some cross grade level groupings of just like kind of grouping literacy into this continuum, which has always been, but saying, here's where the child is, here's where they need to go, and not trying to think like what's, a shift of thinking of, let's just come alongside the child and help them grow and catch up as fast as possible, rather than trying to pinpoint these things of, that sometimes make kids feel like they're not cutting it, like below proficient and all.
Oh, I do know. And kind of what you're describing is my dream world. And I think that that's where we have seen some positive change, and hopefully some future long-term systemic change in education is, the scenario that you're describing, distinctively around literacy is the scenario for every other subject, right? Is children, by and large, in my opinion, have such a variance of competency, right? You could have a kiddo that's super interested in science and be 3 to 4 grade levels more so in their work than another child that potentially would exceed in math or art or language. So this type of education that you're kind of describing, to me, is personalized learning. It's mixed age groups. It's getting back to the almost old schoolhouse version of education, where you have a vast multitude of ages and subject matters, and there's much more of that organic learning that we're talking about, these kind of inspired moments by an educator that they're learning from in context. Do you think, knowing this, right, that we will see, I think we're going to be forced to, but I'd love to hear your opinion on, do you think we're going to see a vast shift in our education system in general because of COVID, not just in the literacy side of things, but just in general?
I mean, I think there's going to have to be, just like everybody, businesses have been forced outside of the box of how can we do business in light of the current reality, and how has that impacted us positively and negatively, and what are we going to do about it. Education is going to be hit with the same challenge of what do we do now, and how can we make the most of this. What I do know that I wanted to kind of add on to the dream world of learning, right, is that I also do believe in standards, in essence, that here's what kids are capable of. Because I think sometimes when we just let kids, 100% for organic, but I've also seen that sometimes kids can do more than what they think they can do. So there's a balance, I think, of allowing kids to be organic and in the moment and fully themselves, and then also having this little push to be the best that they can be, to strive as far as they can strive. And so it's a hybrid of here's the spectrum, but here's what's typical, and trying to catch kids up as fast as they can, because ultimately curriculum is designed for certain brackets.
Scaffolding, yeah.
You want this constant behind the scenes to happen.
Yeah.
So the good news that I've seen, even this summer, I did a small group summer program with kids that were in kindergarten, and they were ready to bloom and become readers, but they just didn't. And so in the summertime, I caught them up in 6 weeks and got them back on track, and even ahead of the game for first grade. So they were ready to go. Same thing with first graders who were stuck right there in the middle, they weren't really sure how to attack those multisyllabic words. And in 6 weeks, I got them from F to J, K, ready to go into second grade. So that being said, with the right tools and the right understanding of how literacy all works together and weaving together, it is possible to catch our kids up and to catch them up quickly, but we're going to have to be strategic about it. And also not put unnecessary pressure on our kids to catch them up.
Yeah.
Because that's not good either.
No, and you'll get pushback on the other side. But I think, I mean, such inspiring, great information. I think, you know, you speak to standards. I've always thought, and this is the approach that we take here at the school, is that, you know, standards can be there. We, in fact, base our curriculum upon the early foundational blocks of Virginia. Virginia does their own version of, it's like Common Core VA, or it's not actual Common Core. It's just the exact same thing with a different name. But what I love is keeping the standards, right? But allowing for the approach to those standards, the competency, the understanding of the standards to be broad. So that how you get to the standard can be left super broad to allow for that learner to learn those things in their learning style, and then support that learning, right? The assessment side of it is with, you know, formative evidence. So you're looking at pictures, videos, recordings, observation notes, things like that, that support that learning, as well as, you know, a summative assessment at that point. And I love adaptive assessments. You're seeing a lot of NWEA map assessment testing going on in schools, you know, as we move forward. I hope, right? I hope that those standards will be quantified differently in the future, because as you know, a child sitting in a moment, whatever that moment takes upon that child could have abusive parents at home. That child could have whatever it may be. They sit down for this test, and that's how they're quantified, right? And that's a really tough thing for a kiddo. So I hope Yeah,
and then so much is placed upon that one moment, that one time. So many conclusions are drawn, and it's,
And you talk about that scaffolding, right? And that can be like somebody pulling a major pole out of that scaffolding when you think about kind of, there's so many factors in a child's success and a child's understanding of concepts that it's sad to me that, and hopefully a light has been shined upon it, because you're seeing a lot of kids in strife and in struggle right now. And we're back. Sorry about that. You see a lot of kids in strife now and struggling through this. So I hope that through, obviously, in a lot of situations, through pain, we grow. And
for sure.
Yeah.
And I think it's really going to be about everything, like the team effect, of just not pointing fingers, right or wrong, teacher's fault, school's fault, but just being like, okay, here we are. The situation's the boss. So where are we, and where do we need to go to try to be kind? Yes.
Yeah.
Be kind and grow, because that's really what it's all about. I mean, you talked about having kids just be prepared for the world, right? So that's ultimately our goal in education, is to grow kind children who are capable. And my company is all about creating confident readers, writers, and thinkers, because I believe that's the core, right? We have to have confidence in our ability to communicate through words, whether we're speaking or writing, and to be able to pursue our dreams in the world, and to learn and grow and give back to society. And so if that's the ultimate goal, just kind of branching down to where we want kids to be in each grade level so that we end up there, and I think once in the wash, it's all going to be fine, but we're going to have pointing fingers come together and just say, okay, so what am I doing? What are you doing? I think huge is that parents are going to have to get involved more than ever. They already have, but a lot of them kind of maybe are thinking, ooh, once school's back in session, I get to take that hat off. And it's going to be like, unfortunately, no. I think for another year or two, you're going to have to play an extra role at just making sure that these gaps are filled, and that your child is like helping identify, what was missed and how it went. Because like you said previously, every kid is interacting with virtual learning in a different way. It's going to be parents are going to have the best lens to know how it went at home, and what their child got or didn't get, and what needs to happen to get them back on track. And the teacher's not going to be able to, quote unquote, fix all of that in the classroom. It's going to be this partnership of teachers and resources and parents and time, and all of us working together, I think.
Yeah, and I think too, it's a vessel or a platform to push forward the message that and this is science, is that a shared equity in the outcomes of your child, the child has much more success, much more chances for success in the future. And I think hopefully, that message gets across, and that, yes, it is inconvenient. Yes, but what else if you're having kids, what else are we doing this all for, right? Is to ensure that they have a better experience than we did. I mean, that's not only, in my mind, what America was founded upon, those principles, but also just the human principle of, we want our society to be better and to learn from our mistakes and to grow. So that being said, we have to wrap up. I could talk, guys, with Brynn. This has been such a fantastic conversation, and I feel like we could, go on and on and on and on. And hopefully we can have you come back on the show to talk a little bit more. Yeah, and I would love to kind of follow up with you. We're going to be doing some some panel discussions, so having some previous guests on to kind of talk about certain subjects. Okay. We'll be doing that super soon, so definitely look out for that. But that being said, Brynn, where can people find you best on the interwebs?
Okay, at my website, inspiringliteracy.com.
I think we're good now.
Okay. On my website, inspiringliteracy.com, by beginning readers, if you go to that page, scroll down to the bottom, and you can just click on Stay Connected. And so I'll be pushing out different free webinar type things to basically support parents. That's kind of what I'm doing right now through the internet, is trying to help parents understand how literacy unfolds in their child, to recognize what's happening with their child, and then giving them tools, those takeaway, those what should I do today kind of strategies. That's kind of where I'm trying to give the world to say, okay, parents, you've got a job to do that you haven't been trained to do. So let me just give you a couple things you can do to see that you can do it and enjoy this journey along with your child too. And maybe consider, or put it into the bucket of, never thought I'd be doing this, but I actually kind of like it. And it's provided this relationship that I've had before that's grown in a different way that I'm going to cherish and enjoy in the future. So that's kind of my hope, to give parents tools to make that happen.
Oh, that's fantastic. And thank you so much, Brynn, for doing the show today. We really appreciate it. It's always nice to have great people on that can learn a little bit, a little bit more about what we're doing here in this crazy virtual learning situation. And, your brain is very, very interesting, and I'd love to pick it in the future. So thank you so much. I'm going to jump Brynn off. Thanks so much. Check her out if you guys are having any, if you're interested, one, in early literacy, and two, if you have a kiddo at home that needs some help, definitely reach out. That's inspiringliteracy.com. We'll leave that in the comments section so that everybody can click on it from there. So that being said, we're going to jump Brynn off. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
All righty. And that being said, friends, thank you so much for tuning into At the Gardens. Today is Wednesday. We are rocking it, and I hope that you guys continue to tune in. We've got some great people coming up on the show. If you need to catch any of the previous episodes of At the Gardens, you can find it on the Creative Gardens Early Education YouTube page, or you can visit www.creativegardensva.com and check out the At the Gardens page. It's got all the videos right there, ready to watch. We rip the audio. It's also on Apple Podcasts as well, too, so definitely check out all the places in which you can listen, hear, watch, take notes, whatever you need to do when it comes to staying up with the show. Remember to like and subscribe on our YouTube channel. The more you do that, the more the algorithm pushes us out. So thank you guys so much. That being said, as always, from Creative Gardens Ashburn Village, keep your head up, keep moving forward, and I'll talk to you later.